Good evening, everybody, and welcome to FIU in DC. My name is Noah Feinberg, and I have the honor of serving as the Chief Justice of the Student Government Supreme Court. And if you're wondering, I didn't think that was a real position. That makes two of us. As a third-year law student, there are many things on my mind. The impending bar exam lurking right around the corner. If AI is going to steal my job. And, of course, just how done I am with still having to go to school. However, as a proud Jewish student and a campus leader, what's constantly on my mind is worry and concern for the virulent rise in anti-Semitism that has particularly found a foothold in many colleges and universities across this country. But we know that campus anti-Semitism didn't begin on October 8th, 2023. My work in this area over the past decade has shown me that when it comes to how administrations deal with anti-Semitism, you really never know what you are going to get. But at FIU, it's a different story. President Jeanette Nuñez, although only a few short months into her term, has not only pledged to combat anti-Semitism on our campus, she has mandated that we become leaders in this fight. That FIU serve as a shining example for the rest of the country to look towards. While President Nuñez could not be with us today, she was kind enough to have recorded a brief message. Let's take a listen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to FIU in Washington, D.C., our university's headquarters in our nation's capital. I regret that I cannot join you in person today, but I'm so proud that FIU is a partner in this critical conversation. Let me begin by thanking Alums for Campus Fairness for convening this important panel. I also want to recognize the distinguished chancellors joining us: Chancellor Kent Syverud, Chancellor Andrew Martin, and Chancellor Daniel Diermeier for their principled leadership during one of the most challenging moments for higher education. Since the October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel, our campuses have seen a disturbing surge in anti-Semitism. At a time when too many institutions hesitated or failed to act, the leaders here today stood firm, protecting their students, preserving order, and upholding the moral obligations we all share. At FIU, with more than 3,500 Jewish students, we've made it clear anti-Semitism has no place on our campuses, not now, not ever. We are honored to be recognized for fostering a safe, inclusive environment for Jewish students, and we are in this fight for the long haul. Thank you for standing on the right side of history and for leading with courage, clarity, and conviction.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Avi Gordon. I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of Alums for Campus Fairness. We are the United Alumni Voice countering anti-Semitism on campuses today, and we have over 75,000 members within our network and serve over 80 campuses, and we're proud to be the United Voice for alumni countering anti-Semitism. We are thrilled and proud to host this event tonight, and obviously we want to thank the folks at FIU here on DC's campus. What a gorgeous facility you have, and we're really appreciative and grateful for this opportunity. Now, last year, higher education became front-page news as schools were taken over by their own on-campus insurgents. Radical students and faculty members set up unlawful encampments, praised the acts of a terrorist organization, and intimidated their own classmates. Too many universities accommodated this hate through inaction. Today, we've gathered to recognize and celebrate those who have done it right, the administrators and institutions that have shown real moral leadership. These standouts have modeled what it looks like to protect Jewish and pro-Israel students, to uphold their own values, and to stand firm when it matters most. The end of the war in Gaza offers the potential to lower the temperature, not just in the region, but right here at home. For our campuses in particular, this moment holds the hope that the fever of hostility towards Jewish and pro-Israel and the pro-Israel community members might finally begin to break. And yet, even as we allow ourselves a measure of optimism, we remain clear-eyed about the world we now find ourselves in. Given the hostility we've seen on campuses, it's no surprise that a recent survey shows that 18-year-old voters are now 5 times more likely to hold unfavorable views of Jews than 65-year-olds. The bracing reality is that unless we can encourage and scale the example of our honorees, the next generation of American leadership, our future policymakers, business leaders, journalists, educators, lawyers, will continue coming of age in university environments increasingly permissive of this anti-Semitism. Indeed, even as the encampments have come down and vandalism and assaults on campuses dropped sharply in the last school year, online anti-Semitic bullying has only risen. Once again, the virus of anti-Semitism is showing its adaptability. This evening, you'll be hearing from 3 university leaders who held the line on campus and defended their institutions from the scourge of anti-Semitism. Vanderbilt University Chancellor Daniel Diermeier, Syracuse University Chancellor Kent Syverud, and Washington University of St. Louis Chancellor Andrew Martin. We're very grateful you made the effort to join us for this important discussion, and even more grateful for the leadership you've demonstrated at your institutions. Thank you as well to our moderator, Ben Jacobs, and of course, our hosts, and the rest of you joining us from Capitol Hill and the broader Washington policymaking community for this important conversation. The October 7th attacks and near simultaneous pro-Hamas activism on college campuses profoundly altered the relationship between many Jewish and pro-Israel alumni and their alma maters. We will feel these effects for years to come, which means our work is far from done. However, conversations like this one will become the foundation on which we work to rebuild those relationships. Thank you all, and I invite the chancellors and Ben Jacobs to come up and we can begin our discussion. Ben, I'll pass it to you to kind of lead us off. Thank you.
Ben Jacobs, I'm a reporter at POLITICO, and thanks for having us. And I guess in Washington tradition, I want to start by offering the chancellors a chance to make opening statements and sort of talk a little bit about what brought them here and what their experiences have been before we dive into questions. Yeah, we'll go in order. We'll go in a line.
It's obviously an honor to be here. I wish I could say that our universities, all of them, and Syracuse did everything right at every step. We've genuinely had to learn how to deal with new things every step of the way. I'd say if things were done right at Syracuse, it was because we had a long-established community that was working together long before October 7th. So we actually knew what to do on October 8th. We knew to call Hamas what it was, a terrorist organization. We knew to ground our response in the need for all our students to be safe. And we knew that there actually was a need to have clear rules that were enforced. And I think that probably was true at the other 2 institutions here, both of which I've worked at.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really grateful for the invitation and the ability to talk about these really important issues. I think, we can sort of get into the details a little bit later about various things that happened and the tactics and strategies that were employed. But at a very high level, I think things at Washington University, there were sort of, 2 things which sort of got us to where we were. First, similar to Kent's experience at Syracuse, we had long-standing relationship, both with Jewish organizations on our campus, but also in the broader St. Louis community. And the fact that we had those partnerships, had built relationships, trusted one another, allowed us to have lines of communication very quickly, and we're able to engage in meaningful and very productive dialogue. I think that was also very important. The other thing for us is that we very early after October 7th laid down a set of principles on how we were going to deal with whatever was to come. Right? And the safety and the security of all of our students was at the very top of the list. And so as we dealt with one situation after another as a leadership team, we would always return to those principles. And of course, we didn't get everything right, but I think we got most things right because that was the lens by which we were approaching everything that was thrown at us.
So in addition to some of the things that were said, I'll add a couple more dimensions that at least we thought about at the time. So the first thing is we try to do every decision that we make be grounded in our principles and our purpose. And we have a very clear point of view on free expression on campus, which has these kind of 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is what we call open forums, which is basically a commitment to free expression along the lines that you would find like in the Chicago Principles, for example. That means, for example, that our students, recognized student groups or faculty can bring any speaker to campus as they see fit without having to check with us. That goes back to the 60s. In 1967, for example, our students had invited Strom Thurmond and Stokely Carmichael on campus. Then let's sink that in. That's Nashville, okay, in 67. So that's a long tradition. We just had to kind of make that clear so that everybody knew about it. We need to name it, sharpen it, and communicate it. Second pillar is what we call institutional neutrality, which means that we will not take positions on policy or political issues unless they directly affect the university. That means, for example, we will not use our endowment for boycotting. We will not boycott vendors. And so any calls for BDS were inconsistent with our values from the beginning without even having to engage on the details. And then the third piece, what we call civil discourse, which means that we're a community dedicated to living and learning together, that we treat each other with respect, that we don't demonize each other, that we use arguments and fact-based reasoning. And when our students arrive on campus, they sign a pledge, which we call a community creed, that they wrote, that incorporates those values. So that was kind of the basis. Everybody that came to Vanderbilt knew these principles and had agreed to them when they joined the community. In the first few months, our students did great. I mean, they did exactly what we'd expect. There was a wall with images of the hostages. There was a wall with images of civilians in Gaza that had been killed. It was great. Then we saw the emergence of a more radical group, kind of like following the Columbia example, I would say. They were asking for divestment, boycotting vendors with ties to Israel and so forth, and denouncing Israel genocide, which I made clear we're not going to do. Go back to step one, right? We're not going to, that's inconsistent with our values. They then tried to occupy my building. On the way of doing that, they injured a security guard. We cleared the building within 24 hours. All the students were suspended. 3 of them were expelled. We had a couple of long-term suspension and a couple of long-term probation. So our sense at that point was, A, it was trespassing. B, we had members of the community being injured. None of these things are consistent with our principles. You had signed that, and we will enforce those rules as we had communicated before, which we did. And, that created a little bit, kind of pushback, as you may expect from faculty, but we were very clear that that's how we do things around here, and it has served us very well.
Thank you. And mention something Chancellor Syverud said, where you talked about how you should have had some work grounding on this, making sure I'm talking to the microphone before, that how much were these issues that you'd thought about before October 7th, which is clearly the dividing line, and how much has it changed your thinking since then? Because this was certainly not an event or sequence of events that many people could foresee how it's played out over the past couple of years. Well, I guess the most important thing we did well before October 7th was actually to run toward religion rather than away from it at what for many of our peers were aggressively secular universities. So we had very large Muslim chaplaincy, very large Hillel, very large Chabad. We had rabbis and imams working for the university, working very closely with their students, and these groups knew each other well. And the result of that was, while we had many of the things that others had, our Jewish students and our Muslim students were helping each other and empathetic for each other and what they were going through. And that included honoring each other's vigils, paying attention to concerns about safety each had, so that when things happened that I really believe were encouraged from Iran, it did not have the involvement of very many, if any, of our own students. Here's a question for you guys.
Sure. So Washington University is a secular university. It goes back to 1853, and it's in our charter that we can have no practice of religion on the campus whatsoever. And one of the things that I can't take credit for, but I inherited in my role, is that we had institutionalized a relationship within our Division of Student Affairs with all of our faith communities. I think it also probably helps that many of our faith communities are 100 yards one way or a couple hundred yards the other way from the chancellor's residence. But as soon as I came back to WashU, I was a long-serving faculty member. Kent was my dean for a good chunk of that time, and I spent 4 years at the University of Michigan, then came back to WashU in this role. And one of the first things I did the fall before I even took the position was spent time getting to know each of the leaders of those faith communities. They also knew each other because our student affairs professionals bring them to the table once a month in conversation, such that whatever happens, big or small, particularly what happens with an individual student who we happen to know is involved in one of our faith communities, really allows us to work together and work in community. I can tell you when I sat down with the leaders of Hillel and Chabad in the fall of 2018, one of the questions I asked is how prevalent is anti-Semitism on our campus? And the reason I asked that question is I saw some of the things that was happening on the campus of the University of Michigan, which was complicated. And the answer that I received was like, well, actually, things aren't so bad here, but our eyes are always open. And I committed at that time that I would be their partner and I'd keep my eyes open as well. And I think from that point on, we'd built a very, very robust relationship with those campus leaders.
And I imagine the answer would be a little bit different today if you talk with them, or would it still be, how much would that answer change if you're having that?
No, I think the answer would change, but I think there'd probably be a little bit of parsing around the phrase on the campus. Many of the things that happen on our campus, including an attempted encampment, the encampment, we didn't allow it to take place, and ultimately had folks arrested to shut it down on a Saturday evening. That 3/4 of those individuals had nothing to do with the university, and so while there were some students who were involved, I would say that we're ever more vigilant. And certainly more concerned than we would have been back in 2018. But I think the sense of the community is that the university stepped up and has done a good job.
So our relationship with Hillel and Chabad has been excellent for a while. I mean, we had a lot of conversations with them. You asked a little bit about also what you learned during that process. So I think the thing that was most profound to me was just how utterly devastating this was for the Jewish community on campus. And it was, the way I would describe it is what people were talking to me about, I mean, not kind of nationally speaking, is that people felt abandoned in their darkest hours. And I think that was a hugely important thing. And I think the fact that we had this relationship and we stepped up during this moment was extremely meaningful to people. So, and I realized this yet again a couple of weeks ago. So we were lucky enough, honored to be recognized by Chabad by what's called the Lamplighter Award. And then we also called the White Rose Society, which is a grassroots organization that recognizes individuals. In the case of the White Rose, non-Jewish individuals had stepped up to protect and provide a safe environment for the Jewish community. Little aside, the White Rose is named after a student group, a German student group that in 1942 printed leaflets to protest the Nazis, and they were arrested and executed. And there were students at the university where I was an undergraduate. So I remember, of course, I know the square that's named after them, the atrium where they sent on the leaflets where they were arrested. Those were very powerful. And I think one thing that is so important is that in these moments when so much is driven by making the right decisions and media and protest, that the human dimension, to see how people are reacting to that and the difficulties they're going through, always remains front and center. So that was very powerful to me during those months, and that was just I was reminded of and I kind of reinvigorated in the events or the celebrations and the looking back to that time that we just had in the last few weeks.
And speaking of looking back, and I'll let, because Andrew, you all mentioned sort of, you're feeling things out and regrets you had. What, looking back, and would you have done differently? 2020 is always hindsight, but what sort of, is there anything you'd say looking back, I should have done this, I shouldn't, that
I, look, you always ask, can you do more? Okay, I think that's the question. I think from the point of view was living our principles, doing the right thing, standing firm, communicating clearly. I think we did really well. And there are a couple of tactical things that we had to fix, which we did over the summer. There were just a couple of things that we did not anticipate properly. But those were small, minor tactical things. I think the big lesson to me is really to understand how difficult this is for people. And the way the head of Hillel said it to me, it's like, it's the worst times we've ever had, and it's better than anywhere else. And both of these statements were true, but just to maintain the human connection was so powerful. So I think one of the things I was proudest doing this is that our Passover Seder in a few months after October 11th, early in the year, was celebrated by 800 people, students on our main lawn, together as a community. And I think those type of symbolic issues are just, the symbolic gestures are just as human gestures, if you will, are just as important as the policy decisions that we make in order to make sure that we live up to our values.
I think the thing that, in retrospect, I wish that we would have done better was immediately after October 7th, thought more about communicating with our alumni and communicating with our parents. We were focused on our campus. We were focused on our community. And campus-wide messages and so forth were being shared with those communities. But we didn't have the intentionality around that. And that spun up a lot of angst that didn't need to be spun up.
Yeah.
The most challenging weekend of my chancellorship so far was 3 weeks after October 7th, Parents' Weekend. My parents' council was there. I was speaking to lots of groups. And people were showing up on our campus assuming that there were people driving around with weapons and Palestinian flags and pro-Hamas signs and everything else. And none of that was happening on the WashU campus. There might have been a little protest that happened like one afternoon, but really it was just everything was relatively normal. And of course, one thing that I'm learning, my daughter's 17, is that college-age students do not communicate with their parents, particularly if everything is okay. And so I had a group of parents show up on the campus who were angry and were really, really concerned about what they were seeing. And they were seeing things mostly in the national media, not on our campus. Thankfully, we were able to sit down and engage. I remember that Shabbat dinner, with dinner concluded, I was invited to sit down. We had a room about twice this size, had about 300 parents, and the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and I answered questions for almost 2 hours with our parents, just talking about, what are the easy things and what are the hard things and what they can expect to see happen and how we would handle various situations and the like. But not being proactive and communicating with parents and alumni, particularly in the very early weeks, was something that we could have done a lot better.
So let me inject a little humility here, which is just to say it was a very different situation if you were in a very blue state, a very progressive city, and a very different situation if you were at a public. And we're all at private universities. So what I guess what my experience was similar to Andrew's, which is the first weeks were very different because the encampment movement and the things you were seeing at Columbia took a while to work their way upstate. And when they got upstate, it was almost like the folks that most of our campuses have who want to be involved in any activist thing that happens. It took them a while before they felt like, wait, we don't have an encampment yet. We need one at Syracuse. Indeed, it took almost until commencement at Syracuse, a long time. What we did have in the early days in Syracuse in the early weeks was an evolving set of rules of what Title VI meant. what created a hostile environment. So I was not prepared to decide whether I needed to launch into doing something when people chanted from the river to the sea, for example, which we ultimately decided we were not going to prevent. So, but we did decide it was a hostile environment to chant globalize the Intifada at our Jewish students or in other settings. It was even a violation to wear it as a button on a shirt, which was a hotly debated free speech issue, including in our faculty. And the other thing we weren't prepared for, and I think we just need to talk about because it's a high issue right now for me, is it was not that long after COVID and people were using masks to avoid accountability for what they were saying and doing. And I wasn't prepared for, wait a minute, how do we balance the public health arguments and the free speech arguments with the need to actually enforce our rules? And a lot of people who with masks we didn't even know and probably were not from the Syracuse University community, but rather from the Sunni community or for activists from elsewhere.
Yeah, and actually that gets back to the challenge with balancing free speech, because this is an issue on all sides that draws very strong feelings, and there's a political debate, but obviously crosses over to creating a hostile environment to hate speech and figuring out how to balance those two competing issues and sort of the right way to get down, how you work that out. Because I imagine there was some, as you mentioned, figuring out what crosses the line, what doesn't cross the line, and sort of what the process was of working that through and making sure that you were both protecting students, but also, protecting people's abilities to speak their mind on the issue as well.
We had to get our own team in line and in agreement of what we were going to enforce and what we weren't going to enforce. And by the way, we also had to decide what we could enforce.
Yeah.
Right. We had to decide that we had the courage to enforce things and get the people who would actually walk up to people and say, if you do not take down that sign, you will be disciplined and you will be suspended or expelled. And we discovered that muscle was not strongly developed up and down the ranks of our teams. It hadn't been done in a long time, and it needed to be developed. And it needs to be maintained, because unless you have people willing to walk up to people you like and respect, your students, and say, you are an adult, these are the rules, these will be the consequences, then there are no rules.
So I have to be careful here because I'm surrounded by distinguished former law school deans, including one at Vanderbilt. But I'll plunge fearlessly anyway into dangerous waters. So, look, I think we have to have clear rules and processes and procedure. That's a given. But it's very important, I think, not to underestimate the importance of culture on campus. And so I'm almost a little worried when I hear this balancing kind of frame. So, we have the top rating from FIRE, the Free Speech Advocacy Group, and the top rating from the Anti-Defamation League. And so you would say, like, how does that work from balancing? I think that the key for us is really this culture of civil discourse, which means that our culture is about not demonizing, ostracizing the other side, denying, excluding them from the community, which of course the worst thing for the students. The worst thing for the students is they're not worried about me. They're worried about being excluded by each other, ostracized because of what they're saying. And that is not a question of policing. That's a question of culture. And so what we did is, we really leaned into that. Remember the thing where they signed a pledge when they come on campus. And then we practice, because they are not prepared from their high schools. Yeah. The overemphasis on kind of psychological safety that high schools have do not prepare our students for a free speech culture. So one thing we've noticed, for example, is they're very worried about speaking up or challenging each other because they're worried to be ostracized. So they're holding back, or they're trying to, kind of gouge what everybody else is thinking. So we have like a 2-week program at the beginning of class. I spend an hour with them talking about it. And then we do these kind of like group therapy exercises where we put them together in like groups of 16. And we have 2 upperclassmen debating, juniors, on a controversial topic, let's say abortion. And they see that we can discuss and disagree and still friends. And that fabric, that we're members of one community that subscribe to the same purpose and the same values, is absolutely essential and needs to be nourished, especially during these times of crisis. So principles, rules, super important, but let's not underestimate the power of culture. And our students now feel that they're stewards of that culture. That there's a sense how we do things around here, and it's their responsibility to do that with each other, not just our responsibility to constantly police it. Because you can't do that when they're talking to each other. And it's so important that they trust each other, because that they remember that they're members, one group that came together, united in the same purpose, even if they disagree on certain topics. So I think this is sometimes underestimated, and from my point of view, enormously important and critical.
The only thing I would add two things. First, while we all serve at private institutions and aren't bound by the First Amendment, I think we tend to use that framework for how we think about these issues. And there's clearly speech that's not protected by the First Amendment, but there is plenty of speech that is protected by the First Amendment that just isn't suitable for being on an academic campus. I would say From the River to the Sea is one of those examples. And while we couldn't ban that language on our campus, I chose to use the institutional voice to condemn that language because of the way in which that was altering the learning environment and the sense of community for primarily our Jewish students. So even though we use this First Amendment framework, it's okay to condemn constitutionally protected speech, right? It's also okay, even at a public university where things are more complicated, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to enact time, place, and manner restrictions in order to be able to protect the learning environment. One of the things that came from our students in the fall a couple of years ago is they said, look, our dormitories are sort of in two different areas on campus, and they're sort of off from the rest of the academic space. But our students were asking, can we please do something so we don't have to run into protesters and signs and people yelling and everything else when I come out of my dorm in the morning to go to breakfast, or come in the morning at lunch because they sleep in all morning. And so that was an easy restriction. We said, look, there are lots of places on this campus, particularly on the academic quads, game on. But actually at the request of our students, we said none of this activity in the dormitories. And that really helped dial things down for many of our students who didn't want this in their face 24 hours a day.
And just to jump on something you said a little bit earlier that you mentioned at Parents' Weekend a couple weeks after, that there hadn't been too much going on, that how much of this was sort of driven by students seeing what was going on at other campuses? Was there sort of a level of social contagion here that this was versus...
Oh, it was huge social contagion. I mean, it took a while to get from New York City to Syracuse. It takes a long time to get from Syracuse to St. Louis. Much of what was happening on our campus was happening weeks, if not months, after what was happening on other campuses, which again afforded us a great opportunity to see what worked and what didn't work on other campuses. But I think much of what played out on our campus were students seeing things happening on other campuses and replicating them.
Yeah, I think it was certainly, we had the same thing. I would say the first 3 months, our students were exemplary. I mean, really, really fantastic, exactly living our values the way we wanted them. And then we could see how the playbook was imported. So there was like not a large group, maybe 30 plus students or something, but they were using the playbook that they'd seen at Columbia and other places, and were putting it was the same messaging. So it's more than social contagion, I think. I think they're organized networks as well. And for sure we saw that. And that was, we showed that things were pivoting, was much more aggressive, was very clearly intended to have us, denouncers of genocide, divest and so forth. And I said at that point, a few weeks in, right after the holiday break, remember, when you came here, there were a bunch of rules and principles, right? What you're asking is inconsistent with these principles, irrespective of the content. Well, we're just not going to, we don't do that. And, if this commitment to civil discourse, so they'd say on their social media said, like, well, this is too important. We're not going to be bound by civil discourse. And so you could see that it was spreading, and there was certainly contagion, but I think much more direct coordination across campus that was fully established in the late fall and winter.
Yeah, I guess I'd say I agree with what Chancellor Diermeier and Chancellor Martin have said, and I agree culture was really important. But I think as the contagion spread, it was very interesting to see the very differential response of different universities. And I think the leadership of these two chancellors was really important because so many chancellors and presidents took the path of least resistance, which was, I don't want to offend anybody. And so I'll say something that's mealy-mouthed, and I won't take a strong position that somebody's going to criticize me for. And Chancellor Diermeier and Chancellor Martin were crystal clear and loud, and were willing to be the lightning rods for much of the community that was eager for encampments to spread, and some troubling things to be said about that could be really fairly interpreted by Jewish students to be about them personally, and Israelis, regardless of where they were politically on the spectrum. And that courage is not yet widespread enough in American academia, I'd say.
Yeah, and I'm at this point, I mean, imagining that is that just sort of the desire that, you mentioned students coming for backgrounds of psychological safeties, that some other leaders in academia are looking to stay in places of psychological safety as well.
Exactly.
And we have a few more minutes before it opens up to questions, but from your perspective, where do things go from here? Is this been a generational event? Is this something that's going to persist at a different level? That how do we, sort of move forward on this issues? Is because, as Chancellor Martin mentioned, 10 years ago, this, the idea that there's broad concern about anti-Semitism on college campuses would, outside of a couple places, would probably not be a subject of concern. And it's a different world now. That what does this look like moving forward over the next, the rest of the school year, the next few years moving forward?
So things are we have had no problems since then at all. I think that commitment to civil discourse has just spread and has strengthened. But I'll say something that I think is, at least to me, enormously important. So the focus, the tremendous traumatic experience for the Jewish community is front and center. Mm-hmm. But what it also did, I think it highlighted deeper problems in the academy, and it made them visible. And it's a little bit like, in ecology, they have this concept of a marker species, kind of like in a river, when, which fish, where do you see trouble first? When you have a problem with anti-Semitism, it usually points to deeper problems. And the deeper problems, I think, in this case, is that we have had a tremendous amount of politicization on campuses, a tremendous amount of ideological homogeneity. The culture of what a university campus should look like has been undermined in many places. And then it blew up, basically, after October 7th. That's my sense. And so, I've been very vocal on this. I know Andrew has been vocal on it, and we've been all talking about this. We have a much bigger problem. Anti-Semitism is the first one. It's the most urgent one. And, of course, we talked about, the increase in anti-Semitic acts and all of that. That I'm not so worried. On my campus, I'm not so worried at this point. I'm worried about higher education and what this incident, what did October 7th teach us? Did it teach us that there was a lot more anti-Semitism than we thought? Yes. 2, is there something much more problematic on college campus that goes beyond the issue of anti-Semitism and is now kind of front and center? So I think it's important not to forget the broader context here, because I think that's something we're going to have to tackle down the line, and this was, if you will, the eruption that brought the broader issue into focus for all of us.
I think the only thing Daniel and I have worked on a lot of these issues together quite publicly over the last couple of years. We're in a moment of structural change, and these conversations that we're having today, we're going to be having 5 years from now and 10 years from now.
Don't say
Well, no, I think we
We're
are.
gonna have in the future. In the future, it's not going to be solved overnight.
It's not going to be solved overnight, but we are. But issues of anti-Semitism on our campuses is something that, at least for this generation of academic leadership, we're never going to forget, and it's something that we're going to continue to lean into, and to build teams that have the muscle to be able to work on. I would say that one of the things that I suspect that we will see, which we don't typically talk about in these types of conversations, but I think is really important, is the role of boards of trustees or regents or directors or whatever they're called, at various institutions. This is an issue that I believe is going to become crucial for almost every board in American higher education, as they recruit the next generation of university leaders.
When Kent is done, I want to add one more point. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just add. All right, fine. I'll add one more comment on that. So that this is not so mysterious for you what we're talking about. So the American Anthropological Association on their website has the following statement. It is a professional standard for anthropologists to put their research and teaching in service of dismantling structures of colonialism. Okay? Now you gotta let that sink in a little bit. Okay? That means we are putting our scholarship in service of a particular political ideology. That is the professional association. As long as we have that, we're in deep trouble. Now that is, and that's not the only example. So those are the types of things that have to be tackled. They're complicated, they're difficult because they touch on complicated issues of academic freedom and shared governance, all sorts of things, and the role of the boards that Andrew mentioned. But that's now in front of us. And it was possible for university presidents to kind of ignore that and hope it goes away. That's over. So our generation has to tackle that with intent, with clarity, grounded in values, with a clear sense of purpose of the university. But that's the task.
So I just come back to what's most important to me, which is my students, and just tell you that I'm still seeing anti-Semitism and incidents of anti-Semitism. And we've had a very troubling one at Syracuse University in which a student ran into a Jewish fraternity during a Rosh Hashanah Shabbat and threw pork against the wall. Okay? And I think I'm not going to comment on it because we leaped on that very quickly, and the person was jailed, caught, people were caught and jailed, and an investigation is going on. So I don't want to presume the facts, but what I want to tell you, I'm proud that we were on it quickly and took it seriously. What it reflects, though, it may well reflect just an appalling degree of ignorance of today's college students of the history of Israel, the history of anti-Semitism, to a degree that factors into that data we were given earlier that 18-year-olds are 5 times as likely to be hostile to Israel and to Jews. And that's our obligation, it seems to me. We need to understand that our students coming in are not the students we thought we had 20 years ago who knew about the Holocaust, who knew about the history. It's a different generation, and we were asleep and complacent that, the groundbreaking history of anti-Semitism in the United States ends with a paragraph saying, it was published in the late 1990s, and it ends with a paragraph saying, we're never again going to go back to that in the United States because, especially on colleges' campuses, because the education system is so focused that never will it command support from the vast majority of the public. That's what it ends. I can give you the citation. We all thought that was true, and we for 20 years let this be aggressively developed, as it always has been intentionally developed in the past. It's not, anti-Semitism hasn't happened without agents encouraging it or using it. And so we ought to be over that complacency now, so we have a positive moral obligation to figure out what to do about it educationally. And I think we're only started on it. I think that what Chancellor Martin and Chancellor Diermeier have done is being willing to say we have a problem, including in some academic disciplines and including among some of the most elite institutions. And what's been fascinating to me is the degree to which we're still in denial. We're not in, what do we do about it? We're in denial.
Yeah, I'm still left with a bunch of other questions, but it's time for folks in the audience to ask if they have any questions. Have microphones being handed out now.
I'll start up here.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Oren Steer from FIU. Very happy to be here. I'm a professor of religious studies and I direct our Global Jewish Studies program, and I'm helping to spearhead our own campus initiative against anti-Semitism. And I just wanted to mention that we are a large public university, and we do have some different challenges. But nonetheless, I think we've been successful, as you have. I really want to commend the chancellors speaking today about your courage in speaking out about these issues and taking leadership roles. And also I want to commend Alums for Campus Fairness for convening this. I guess the question I wanted to ask relates to the last issue about the future and about education. In other words, there's this issue of, we all know what it was like, many of us, I think, know what it was like to be October 8th Jews. But I think now we have to start talking about what it's like to be October 9th Jews. Things have settled down in terms of return to hostages and everything. To be an October 9th Jew, to be an October 9th person, is to recognize these problems, to recognize that anti-Semitism is really the canary in the coal mine. And how are we going to turn it into some long-standing educational change? What is the educational solution? We're all educators, and we're trying to bring the next generation into a higher level of awareness. And this issue of widespread ignorance, I think, is really the challenge for us. So what are some things that you all can propose that we can do to help this issue?
What you describe, I think, is exactly what we need to do. We need to have more educational offerings, and that comes in multiple different ways. I think it comes with classes. We have a very successful class on the history of anti-Semitism, for example, which was essential post-October 7th. And, we have a nice religious Jewish studies program, and the leader of that taught that it was absolutely essential. Then you need to have, I think, campus conversations that delve into these types of issues. So we had, just summing it, David Volpe on campus, who talked very elaborately about that, Brett Stevens and a whole bunch of others. And then you need to have, and then that needs to be embedded in the culture where these conversations continue. So it's great to have the classes, it's great to have these events, but the most important thing, I think, is that among students, especially among students in the residential colleges on the way back to class, that they can have real conversations without immediately rushing to righteousness and demonizing the other side. Because that's how peer-to-peer education can happen as well. And I think it's very important that comes back to the cultural point, is that we're creating an environment where people also can ask things or challenge something, or they don't know, because many students don't know. And it takes courage for them to admit that and to see, I always thought about it, how do you think about that without immediately falling into, are you with me, are you against me? That's the poison that is ripping university campuses apart.
I would add one thing, which is a bit more tactical, but I think is actually even more challenging. Students today are presented and consume an enormous amount of information from social media. And it is much more difficult today than it was 1 year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago to decipher what's truth and what's just junk. It is our obligation. It can't start at the universities. It has to start in K-12. But one of our biggest educational challenges is how do we teach our students how to be good, responsible consumers of information when there are actors that are feeding them junk all the time. And that's something that I didn't have to face when I first started teaching college students back in the 1990s, and is something that is really challenging, but I think really fundamental to working on some of these problems.
Oh, thank you. Hi, thank you all. So I actually have two questions. First of all, I was wondering if you could comment on why a lot of your peers have been unwilling or unable to take the actions that you all have taken, because you're sadly very unique in this area. I also had a question for Chancellor Diermeier. I was wondering if you could talk more about these networks on campus, and do you see these as kind of organic and student-driven, or is it more outside groups and NGOs?
I'll take the first question. I thought you were going to ask him about his football win on Saturday.
Congratulations.
Talk about that all day.
Everything played out differently on different campuses, and there were information and constraints that some of our colleagues had to deal with that we don't know and we don't understand, and so I think it's dangerous and probably not helpful to be a Monday morning quarterback and sort of.
There you go.
I worked it in to hypothesize about why things happened in certain places in different ways, because things were complicated and there were things that happened on campuses that the public doesn't know about, and so I'm certainly not going to talk about what other university leaders did, because I don't understand the full context under which they were operating. Obviously, I'm happy to talk about what we did at WashU.
So I'll say something about your
That's my official
I love
dodge.
that. That was very nice. So it's very hard to understand that, it's just as Chancellor Martin said, because the context is different and so forth. And I'm, if you're not in the seat, it's difficult to really judge that. I would say one thing, however, is I think that having clarity on principles is really helpful. But you want to do this when the sun is shining. The old thing, fix the roof when the sun is shining. So when I arrived at Vanderbilt, which is a little over 5 years ago, one of the things we had that, it kind of was implicit but not explicit, we made this clear commitment to institutional neutrality, which meant, that's the way I interpret it, restraining from taking positions that are not core to the university's purpose in word and deed. Deed here means we're not going to use the endowment for divestment at all. Now, once you have that principle in place, and somebody says, well, you gotta do the BDS aspect, right? You don't even have to engage, because it doesn't matter for what purpose, we're not doing it, go back to chapter 1. And so those things are principled and they're helpful at the same time. So it's not an accident, I think, that if you go back a year and a half ago, there were like 3 to 4 universities that had made that commitment to institutionality. I think like 3 out of the 4 on the stage right now, and now it's 140, because it is such a bad idea to let your campus being ripped apart to try to force the university to take an issue on this side or the other that has nothing to do with the university's purpose. That's just a bad idea. Irrespective of whether, and it's principled, but it's also a bad idea. So I think you have, that's an important part, is to anticipate how these things can play out and then make sure that your principles are aligned with your purpose. And then the second thing is, I think it's a mix. I think there's some imitation, for sure. We see this, for example, on issues. So these like, there's always kind of a group of students that are like protest inclined. That's like that's the kind of that's what they're activists and that's what they care about. That's fine. But then the issues tend to sometimes be like accidental almost. It kind of doesn't, is it this one or that one? It's it's like something. So we had for unknown reason suddenly a movement on our construction workers. Protecting our construction. Our construction workers were perfectly happy. Didn't want to have anything to do with the protest, but that kind of bubbled up. We don't know. So some things are organized, some things are contagious. We will, at some point, I think we will know much more whether there was third-party influence on that and how that worked. There have been reports on that. Of course, there's a lawsuit that has alleged that. So it would be very, very good to understand this in more detail. I don't think we have a full picture of that yet. I don't have it. Maybe others have it, but I don't have that at this point.
So, institutional neutrality on issues includes institutional neutrality on an issue that worries me, which is a lot of leaders abroad and here in the United States, I believe, have a range of views even on whether Israel has a right to exist at this point. And under free speech and free thought, they're entitled to think that. I think the important thing to me is that people are not entitled to think that all our students, including our Israeli students and our Jewish students, have a right to the same safety, ability to speak, ability to be involved, and ability to be in every activity that everybody else has, regardless of what anybody's attitude is to Israel and the war in Gaza. And what I'm worried about is without a lot of work, attitudes towards this will translate on our campuses to an attitude that our Jewish students and our Israeli students are less students than everybody else.
Hi, my name's Randy. I'm a furloughed government attorney. I'm not Jewish, but I care very deeply about issues of anti-Semitism and the security of Israel because I understand that what starts with Jews when the mob is coming does not necessarily end with Jews. My question for you is, you lead very, very esteemed universities, but I feel as a recent graduate, not of any of your schools, that communities are increasingly siloed. Students join a particular organization, they socialize with people from that organization, and if you have views contrary to theirs, they don't even speak with you oftentimes. They don't want to socialize with you, particularly on very hot button issues like the question of Israel and the war against Hamas. My question for you is, what do you feel you can do on your campuses to encourage students to get out of their silos? We hear a lot about critical theory. It's very in vogue in academia. Critical theory means criticism and being open to different ideas. So how can we get students out of silos to restore civil discourse on our campuses and universities? Thank you.
That is such an important point, and everything in society goes the wrong way. And on that line, it's the politicization, it's the kind of tribalism, the political tribalism, the social media. So we need to really lean in on the other side. So we feel a particular obligation at Vanderbilt. So our founding document, when we received the gift from Cornelius Vanderbilt, said that we wanted to create the great university of the South. Now we're like national, of course, but to bring all together all the parts of a divided country, which was kind of post-Civil War. So a lot of this is such. So what are the specific things? One, make it clear that it's an expectation to be open and reach out to people different from yourself. Have a residential college. We are fortunate. We have a residential college system where all the freshmen are together, and then the upperclassmen are in colleges. There's an enormous amount of programming, so that these conversations happen, and the students cannot self-select in these colleges. They're assigned, so they may have a roommate, or they may have on the floor people that have very different points of view on them. Then they're the speakers, and the engagement opportunities there. Then there are classes. So I mentioned the anti-Semitism class, but the class I love the most, we started it 2 years ago, which is called Free Speech and Dangerous Ideas, which is only talks about hyper-controversial topics, nothing else. And it's 120 students oversubscribed, and after the Charlie Kirk shooting, the students talked, that was the topic that day, which ripped so many campuses yet again apart. And the professor told me all he had to do is hand the microphone around. And the culture that comes with that is so critical. So we have a very strong chapter of college Democrats, college Republicans. After the Charlie Kirk shooting, they published a joint statement where they condemned the killing and reaffirmed their commitment to civil discourse. So everything you can do, student culture, classes, orientation, selecting the students, talking about it during the college tours, we do all of that, and we still can do more. So 100%, you're 100% right. It's absolutely essential, and universities must do that, must lean in, and whatever we can do in that direction is noble and important work.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Right.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to our chancellors and to Ben for moderating and for having a really honest and open conversation. I think all your points were fantastic, and I personally enjoyed it. Maybe you'll be here for a few minutes for a little back and forth here and there. And thank you all for being here for this important program. Again, we're Alums for Campus Fairness. I encourage you to all to join us. There's QR codes around. There's also some refreshments over in the rotunda. So thank you all for being here and taking the time to be with us today.